Welcome to the month of February's EVCO monthly meeting. And as you can see here, I put a nice picture of our parliament with the Ukrainian flag on it in honor of our compatriots in Ukraine that are fighting the good fight. So, anyways, let's think about those people that really have something to fight for, unlike some of the people we saw in front of that very building a couple of weeks ago. So, anyways, so today on the agenda, we'll briefly talk about the election results from the last meeting and the first board meeting after the election. We'll talk about EV news. Mike has prepared an excellent presentation on the latest EV news. And then Mitchell will talk to us about legacy automakers and what they're doing in the EV space. And again, that's a really good presentation that will go over what every major automaker is planning in terms of investments and various other things that Mitchell will go through. So really good summary of what's happening out there. And if you'll see that, not that I want to steal all of Mitchell's thunder, but you'll see that there is humongous amounts of money being spent by a number of auto manufacturers to secure the EV future. So it's looking really positive, and Mitchell will be talking about that. Then I'll give you a brief update on the concierge project, which we talked about last month. We do have a name. We'll wait until we get there before we tell you about it. And then we'll discuss, as usual, past and future events. So we're starting to fill our calendar for the year. So I'll have a few events in there in the calendar, and we'll firm up the events as we go forward. And again, if you have ideas of events you think we should be participating in, we're certainly looking for suggestions. If you think that there are events that are worthy of our participating. And again, we're looking for events that aren't necessarily car focused or environmentally focused. We want to reach outside the bubble, right? So after that, we'll go to the roundtable. So I guess the first presentation is, I think, Mike. No, sorry, election results first. Sorry, it's me for just a second. So following the elections last month, so these are the members of the board. And like I said at the last meeting, the executive positions are determined by essentially consensus or a vote during the first board meeting after the election. So I remain as president. Mike remains as vice president. Darren remains as corporate secretary, and Craig will be our new treasurer for the upcoming year. And the rest of the directors are there. Sam and Rob are the two new guys on the block, and we'll give them a chance to acclimatize themselves to the board before we ask them to take on a bigger role. Okay, so the news, Mike?
Yippers. Okay. So first up, Volkswagen is halting production in two of its its main two EV plants in Dresden and Zwickau due to supply problems because of the invasion of Ukraine. Turns out the wiring harness that they use, the electrical harnesses, come from Ukraine, and since the Russians invaded, they are. Can everybody mute themselves, please?
Marcel, we hear you.
There we go. So since the wiring harnesses are produced in Ukraine, the supplies have obviously come to a halt, and so they will be halting production in Zwickau starting tomorrow, and Dresden starting on Wednesday. They say until Friday, but we'll see. It's probably going to be longer. So if you're waiting for an ID4, you may have to wait until the Tennessee plant comes online. But the impact it'll impact all of the electric vehicles that Volkswagen currently produces. Next slide, please. All right, so I don't know if you guys follow Bjorn Nyland. He's a Tesla Bjorn on YouTube. He's a prolific YouTuber, and he does a lot of good stuff. And he was doing some stuff with Nokian tires in Finland, in Lapland, and sure enough, at the parking lot in his hotel, there was a test vehicle for the Ioniq 6. Now it was heavily camouflaged. This is sort of an artist impression of what it might look like. The ID6 or the Ioniq 6 is the next vehicle in Hyundai's upcoming line of EVs, and it's supposed to be a sedan. They had a prototype car that looked fantastic, like nothing else on the road, and then they launched the production version, and it was basically laughed out of the room because it was really ugly. And so they've taken another crack at it. They withdrew that version, and they've been working on another version, which is what they're testing now in Finland for winter testing. It was heavily camouflaged, so it's hard to really get a sense of if they fixed the ugly problems. The original version looks like something from the 90s. It was just like a random ugly 90s sedan, so they definitely need to up their design game after the Ioniq 5. But anyway, he has a great video. He gets really in there. He gets like underneath the car with the camera, and he's like looking at all the ports. And there's some interesting ports that are unidentified on the rear of the car. And so market launch is expected later this year, and then deliveries probably next year. So always fun to see a new EV, in disguise coming soon. And definitely check that video out if you're interested. Next slide, please. Okay, yeah, so the title didn't quite work out with the formatting there, but they are making progress on Rivians. So RJ Scringe said recently that they're making progress on increasing production capacity. They've been struggling with ramp up, which is not uncommon for a startup. You'll remember Tesla had the same issues with the Model 3. As of the end of last year, they'd only built 1,000 vehicles. They have a 71,000 unit backlog. So clearly they need to up their game. The production line was down for 10 days in January to make changes to the production lines. But they're back up now, and they're currently, as of the end of January, they were running at around 200 per week, 200 units per week, which is not great. But RJ is confident that they are ramping as they expect. So hopefully, if you've ordered a Rivian, yours will be coming soon. They did delay the R1S, which is the SUV version, till the end of the year. But yeah, that's partly due to chip shortages as well. So there's progress on Rivians. Next slide, please. Okay, so Ford, Jim Farley, who is actually related to Chris Farley, by the way, they're brothers. Jim Farley, the CEO of Ford, not the comedian who does, or did, I guess he passed away. But anyway, he was saying that they are going to produce 600,000 electric vehicles by the end of next year, which is insane. This was in a tweet on the 23rd, so just a few days ago, that he confirmed the plans to make 600,000 EVs by the end of next year. They confirmed that the company has also begun shipping the first e-transits to customers in the US. So now Ford is officially producing 3 electric vehicles, the Mach-E, the F-150 Lightning, and the e-Transit. Mach-E volume is expected to be 200,000 units this year, while the F-150 is expected to be 160,000 by the end of next year. And that has been doubled twice already. And ignore my typo, please. And then so the e-Transit presumably will take up the balance, but it's unclear if they're going to launch something else. They were talking about an electric Ford Escape and whatnot. That has been delayed. I'm not sure if that falls into 2023 or not. But anyway, quite a few vehicles that they're producing. So this is good. This is a good thing. We want to see that. It's still a long way from the million F-150s they make a year that are gas-powered, but, we're getting there. All right, this is what the Volkswagen ID Buzz looks like in light camouflage. So there's automakers have fun with camouflage. They always do a weird pattern that confuses the camera so that it messes with depth perception and whatnot. And then the heavier camouflage, they actually put like foam and stuff on it to make it like to disguise a silhouette. But anyway, Volkswagen has removed the foam bits, and so now it's a lot more of what it'll look like as a production vehicle. Interestingly, it's only going to be a 5-passenger minivan as a passenger version. The freight version will be a 3-person car with a bench in the front, basically for 3 people. So that's an interesting thing. The other interesting thing to come out of their slowly leaking of information is that the North American version will have a longer wheelbase. So maybe North America will get a 7-seater minivan, which would make more sense. Production is expected to start in the first half of this year for Europe and then next year for North America. They are announcing everything on March 9th, so we have about a week before we find out all the real details about the van. But this is what they've released so far to build a bit of hype and buzz. So that's pretty cool. Buzz. See what I did there? Pun. ID buzz. Never mind. Okay. Next slide, please.
Good one.
Thank you. I try. No, I don't. Next. There we go. Okay, so a new Yale study came out that finds that gas cars produce more supply chain emissions than EVs do. So we always encounter people that are like, well, EVs create more CO2 to produce, therefore fossil cars are better, or some nonsense like that. So Yale did a big study. Now, I will caveat this a little bit. It's not as nicely clear cut as we were hoping. Basically, what they did is they figured out the life cycle emissions for producing both sets of vehicles, and then they applied a carbon price to the carbon emissions to create those vehicles. And essentially, what that means is that if you apply carbon pricing to the supply chain to make a fossil car, and then you apply the same carbon pricing to an EV, the EV is slightly cheaper, right? Because you're pricing in all of the emissions that are currently free and aren't valued in the supply chain, right? So it artificially would jack up the price of a fossil car because now you're accounting for all of the pollution it makes, whereas the EV has very little pollution on top of what a fossil car uses. So therefore, it levels the playing field. So it's a bit of an economics thing, but it makes sense. And essentially, cars that don't burn stuff are better. That's what we have to get out, is that fossil cars pollute when they're built and they continue polluting when they roll off the line. EVs pollute when they're built and then they stop polluting when you use them because most of our energy is clean. And even if your energy is less clean, it's still more efficient. So either way, you're in the green. So that's that. If there's a link, this presentation will be put up on the website, and there are links in the notes. So if you want to read up on the actual study, it's there in the notes.
So the price of a EV is higher. So the study shows that it's even less carbon intensive building an EV, because if at the end they come out being slightly less,
yeah,
they still have to get like that 5 to 10% premium from being an EV.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. So it's a complicated way to do it, but yeah, it's that. If you level the playing field with carbon pricing, EVs are cheaper.
Yeah, Mike. So I haven't looked at the I saw the headline and I haven't had a chance to read it. But is this is only supply chain emissions for the manufacturing of the vehicle, right?
It's they call it from, I think I put the quote in there somewhere. It's from raw material to market, right?
Okay.
So it's basically like the well to wheel, but for the car, not the fuel, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, next slide, please.
To go back to that one though.
Sure.
When you think about it, though, what EVs do, in my opinion, is they're making it possible to mass produce electrified machinery, whether it's EVs or mining trucks or whatever. So by building EVs, the long-term effect is going to be that the emissions from mining, transport, and manufacturing are going to go down, right? So I don't even think it doesn't even make sense in a way to count the emissions from the gasoline-powered vehicles or diesel-powered vehicles that are making it possible to make EVs, because that's kind of their last gasp. And I mean, they're already making electric mining trucks and electric, like these things are coming out. So anyway, that's just a way of thinking about it that's a little different than what currently is going into an EV versus what could in the future go in.
Yep.
Yeah, and that also applies to the supply of electricity, because what we're seeing is everywhere the supply is getting cleaner. The exception actually might be Ontario. I don't know if you guys know this, but if the current plan comes to fruition, the electrical grid in Ontario will be emitting three times more greenhouse gases than it is now by 2030. But everywhere else, essentially, the grid is getting cleaner as they're shutting down coal plants and going to renewables. So as things move, EVs are going to become even better.
Yep.
My house, which is in Ontario, is getting cleaner because I just got my I can't remember the technical term for it, but basically the agreement with Hydro One to net meter and put on solar panels. So that's coming.
Cool.
Yeah. So moving on with the news, some big changes for the Nissan Leaf for 2022. They have moved the Nissan emblem from the top of the hood to the fake grille. They've added more paint colors and a new wheel option. So if you thought Nissan was falling behind in the EV space, my friends, well, yes, they are. Yes, they absolutely are. It still has CHAdeMO for reasons that I think nobody understands at this point anymore. And it has the same exact battery as before with still no thermal management, so it will degrade aggressively and prematurely, as all Leafs do. So, if you were hoping the Leaf would die this year, it's not, but maybe it should. Just
so the area, which I think is the area it's called, right? The other
Aria.
EV they're coming up with, Aria.
It's the Aria.
Yeah, it's going to have a CCS combo, I believe, right?
It has CCS and an actively thermal managed battery.
Yeah.
It's also more expensive than basically all of the competition with less range. So,
wow. Okay.
Nissan is really killing it with the EV lead they had.
Oh yeah.
Is the Leaf price coming down?
No, it's not. At least not announced anyway.
It's basically suicide by Nissan.
Correct. Yeah, I mean they're I don't know what they're doing. I think they're just circling the drain or something. It doesn't matter. Anyway, that's the new Leaf, same as the old Leaf.
Mike, are you going to talk about the en route IV chargers?
I am not.
I just want to mention really quickly,
go for
it. They now have chargers set up. They're not super duper chargers, but they're level 3, and they're CHAdeMO, and they have a Tesla charger that has a Tesla CHAdeMO charger bolted onto the CHAdeMO side of the thing, and then you have to take it off the left-hand side. So you have to either unplug the CCS combo, get that cable out of the way, pull the Tesla charger out of the way, and then plug the CCS back in or lift it over. It's really convoluted, but it's interesting that they've solved the non-Tesla charger.
Interesting.
Hooking a $600 adapter to a CHAdeMO thing, and so then there are 3 CHAdeMOs. They're pretty, and I posted some pictures on the one that's just outside Kingston and Odessa on the 401.
Yeah, so 6 of them are open, I believe, at this point, right? And I believe there's going to be 20 or so out of the 26 locations they have that are going to have chargers sometime this year.
Yep, by the end of the year.
Yeah. By the way, I don't want to be political here, but the money for that came from NRCan. So it was subsidized by NRCan. It was not subsidized by the ones who are taking credit, i.e. the Ontario government. So just be aware of that. Okay.
Yeah, Mitchell's asking if they're 125 kilowatts. I think they might be 150s, but I could be wrong. But they're in that neighborhood. They're in that ballpark. I did see the tweets about it when they launched them. Anyway, there are now Proterra powered Van Hool coach buses. So if Greyhound wants to come back from the dead, there are now electric options for them. There's a company called ABC Companies, which is a very creatively named company. They are a coach seller. They don't build coaches. They're just a reseller, but they're apparently very big. So who knew? And they've had a Van Hool CX45E all-electric coach bus roaming around the Pacific Northwest. It's a 56-passenger bus, the kind you would see just, as a Greyhound or whatever. And it arrived in December 2021. They started getting deliveries in early 2021. Sorry, that should say 2020, December 2020. I wrote this in a hurry. I was busy. They've been using the bus to collect data and to do some benchmarking because, it's a new thing and they need to test it out and figure out how it's going to fit their customers' needs. It has a 676 kilowatt hour nickel metal cobalt NMC battery supplied by Proterra. It has an average range of 450 kilometers, so you'll see that's a decent range. They had some issues with charging stations. The layouts of fast chargers are not really conducive to buses, so they had some issues with that. However, the charging happened faster than they were expecting, so 2.5 hours to 3 hours for a typical charge. And they found that on the typical routes that the buses would do, they never used more than 65% of the charge for the bus. So the missions that these buses would get assigned are completely doable with the packs that they are built with. So they're sort of dispelling the myth that buses need like 2,000 kilometer range and whatnot. And so there you go. These are used in Europe already, I believe, and yeah, so now they're in North America. So if you do take the bus, like Voyager or something, maybe bother your bus companies to make the switch to electric, because now there are options. Next slide, please.
So Voyager, by the way, was purchased by Greyhound a few years ago.
I don't know. Whatever. Buses. I used to take the bus when I was a student. It was cheap. All right, now we're into the Tesla corner. Raymond's favorite section of the news. So Giga Berlin is expected to receive production approval this week. They've been waiting on an environmental permit, and that's one permit to start producing vehicles. So there's a bit of irony there that they're waiting on an environmental permit, but whatever. The German newspaper, I'm not even going to pronounce it, basically said the Prime Minister of Brandenburg, which is where the factory is located, met with the task force, and they finally agreed on approval for the project. Deliveries should start by the end of March. If you've been following the drone videos, you'll see the cars are piling up outside the factory. Tesla is already planning a grand opening ceremony publicly that's supposed to be either March 22nd or 23rd. It hasn't been exactly nailed down. So that's likely when cars will start to be delivered. They usually like to do a launch party and then have, the deliveries happen that night kind of thing. Unlike the Model Ys out of Texas, these are the older style with the 2170, older style with air quotes. 2170 cells, they won't be using the 4680s like the new ones out of Texas are. Next slide, please. And that's what the factory will look like. Pretty picture. So Darren, if you paid for your full self-driving and you're get the update and you're a good boy and drive safely, then you might be able to get on to the full self-driving beta for Canada. They've started rolling it out. It's been available to Americans since October 2020, but as of the last quarter, they've had almost 60,000 owners enrolled in the program in the US. They recently pushed out software version 2022 4.5.4 in Canada, which enables owners to request. So you have to push a button to request it. And then once you request it, there's an approval process that starts. And basically they Big Brother, you're driving every day to see how safe you are, give you a score. And if you meet their random determining, whatever they decide makes you qualified, then they'll enable it for you, assuming you purchase full self-driving or whatever. Darren says, I would never get the safe score, too much acceleration. Yeah, probably. So I hope you didn't pay the 10 grand extra for that because, yeah. Anyway, if you have a Tesla, go for it. Next slide, please. Okay, and just like Berlin, Giga Texas is also waiting on one approval. So hooray, bureaucracy. They can begin deliveries of Model Ys built in Giga Texas as soon as they receive the EPA's Certificate of Conformity. Now, to be clear, the Model Y already has a Certificate of Conformity for all the versions. However, because the ones built in Texas will have the new architecture with the 4680s and it's a structural pack, it has to be amended in order for those vehicles to be delivered. So basically, they're just waiting on some paperwork, and then as soon as those are done, they will be shipped off to customers. The expectation is that'll happen in early April because they're holding an event at the factory in early April. And so in true Tesla fashion, they'll probably do deliveries at that point.
How many different variants are there of the Model Y?
There are currently 3. There is the good question. There's the standard one, which is like a long-range all-wheel drive. There's the performance all-wheel drive long-range, and then there's the ludicrous one.
Sorry, I meant about the different cells. Yeah, sure, there's different variants that way, but what about the technology behind them, the different cells being used in structural packages, non-structural packs?
Right, okay, so...
The only one that's not that's using the 4680s are the ones that are going to be coming out of Texas.
Yeah.
Everything else is still using the old batteries, 2180s or 2070s.
Yeah.
And actually, there are only...
now the old
there's only 2 versions of it right now that are available. There's the long range and the performance version. I believe in China they maybe said I think they're selling the standard range, the rear-wheel drive model standard range there. But in North America, there's only those 2 versions.
Well, when I looked up this article, there are 3 models of Model Y that are under the certificate for 2022, and it was the long range, the performance, and then the ludicrous one. So
yes, no, there's no ludicrous. But they're not
it
selling
might be out
ludicrous.
on the market, but anyway, there's
it's not in the market. But it's not clear yet if they're going to market these ones with a structural battery pack any differently than the other ones. There's a lot of people out there who have been waiting for those batteries for whatever reason, right? But it's not clear if you'll be able to actually buy something that's specifically going to be the
the current understanding is that Giga Texas is supposed to supply the eastern half of North America, while Fremont will continue taking care of the western half. So presumably, if you live in Ottawa, like my parents, and have ordered a Model Y in blue, like my parents, then you'll get the new 4680s, which is what my dad is actually hoping for as well. So, yeah. Next slide, please. Okay, and so continuing on with Giga Texas, I follow a lot of drone pilots. They put on nice music, and then the drone just flies around. It's kind of fun. Anyway, the Austin plant, as of yesterday, had over 220 Model Ys parked outside. These are off the production line. They're all blue and black. So I keep telling my dad that one of them is probably his. It's not, but, whatever. They're the long-range all-wheel drive version, so it's the entry-level one. With 19-inch wheels, and they have 227 Model Ys, and that's the new parking spot that they built for the factory for the new cars, and they just sort of line them up there. And there's more every day, like hundreds every day are added to that pile, so that's pretty cool. Follow him on YouTube if you're interested in more. All right, next.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Mike. On YouTube, there's a few people who post some videos of all the plants, actually. So you could get some, even of Fremont. They do some flyovers a bit less frequently, but you see some the plant in Berlin also, and the plant in Shanghai. Shanghai is interesting because they're still building, they're still adding to the plant. And I heard from Autoline actually today that apparently Tesla's announced that they're going to build a second plant right beside the existing plant in China.
Yeah, they want. Apparently, the rumor is they're going to try and get up to 2 million units per year from China.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
Cool. Mitchell,
I heard a rumor too that they were.
Oops.
I heard a rumor that they were also looking at building a plant near Beijing. So I don't know if that's true, but it was floating around Twitter.
Well, there's been a number of rumors about plants for Tesla. There's been some of plants being built in the UK. There was actually one, the plant planned for Russia, but I think that might go on the back burner. But so there are lots of rumors coming out all the time.
They should build it in Ukraine. Those cars would be amazing.
Well, yeah.
They would be built like.
I was going to mention that we all have a few grumbles about Elon Musk and the convoy, but right now supercharging in Ukraine is free. So and he's prioritizing sending all the Starlink satellites to Ukraine and all the terminals to Ukraine. So he can be a jerk sometimes, but then he can come back and do that.
Yeah, and actually on a slightly funnier note related to that is some of the EV chargers in Russia were hacked, and the display says something like, I can't remember what,
it says
Putin's an idiot or something. Or?
F Putin.
Yeah, and something else too. So, yeah. Anyhow, if Russia could hack other people, I guess other people could have
Anonymous
Russia,
has
right?
been very busy on the internet lately.
Yeah. So Mitchell, you're up next.
Sure, I'll jump in with my presentation, which follows Mike's presentation. Some of my information I think is relevant from Mike's presentation, but I'm going to try talking about a couple of more specific things. So what I was going to start with is this slide talking about where, I guess in this case, I'm looking at Tesla sits as an automaker in 2020, which I know is not 2021, but we'll get there. And this was mostly looking at some of the larger automakers. And I learned from this that Daimler is actually a lot bigger than I thought. But this is on a revenue basis, not necessarily on a vehicle basis. So the numbers you see are based on revenue because it's a lot harder to put on a graph vehicle production because some people report all their vehicles, some just report commercial vehicles and then personal vehicles and all that. Revenue is pretty much the same for all automakers. So I'm going to focus, I think, on pretty much every one of these except for Nissan and Suzuki, because Suzuki is amazingly still making cars, and Nissan is being, at least from my understanding, adopted by, I believe it's Mitsubishi. Well, Nissan, Mitsubishi, and Renault are getting together to make a car company, so they'll be called, I don't know what. But I'll focus on everybody else except those two. I guess just go to the next slide there. So Tesla as an automaker in 2021 produces about 1 million vehicles. And I'd like to start with Tesla just because they only make EVs. And then hopefully as going through the rest of these guys, you'll see that at some point, these other automakers will also eventually transition to potentially producing only EVs, but we'll see how long it takes some of them to get there based on all kinds of different things and what their projections are. So as Tesla currently stood in 2020, is that 2020 revenue that I showed you is based on only 500,000 vehicles and 23,000 superchargers. Their 2021 plan, as I kind of laid out, was to fully ramp up Shanghai, which is still not fully ramped up as far as I understand. Get Berlin to start producing up to 500,000 Model Ys, and get Texas online to start producing Model Ys and Cybertrucks. On top of that, they're kind of expecting to double production of vehicles is increasing at basically a doubling year over year. And they're growing the revenue at 65% year over year. And in 2021, at the end of 2021, they had 31,000 superchargers. So in a single year, they added almost 10,000 superchargers. I called it about a 50% increase. So Tesla's got multiple different avenues in which they're growing, but those two ones, the superchargers and their vehicle production numbers, are kind of the two that I kind of keep track of. Yeah, so that kind of growth that they're seeing, at least from their forward-looking reports, is a 50% average annual growth rate year over year for the next 5 years. And that's kind of important once I get past all these other automakers that I can show you in where that kind of puts EVs on a map. So let's go to the next slide there. So Volkswagen, which passed Toyota as the largest producer by revenue, or sees most revenue. So this is Volkswagen Group. So that includes Audi, Lamborghini, Bentley, BMW. It includes all of Volkswagen's products. So they make 9 million vehicles a year, which is a lot. And in 2021, that was 263,000 of which were EVs, which was actually a 100% increase from 2020. And when you start from zero, any kind of 100% increase looks impressive when it's not actually as many vehicles as Tesla makes. But nonetheless, they've taken a pretty good stance in Sweden, Denmark, Finland, and Ireland, where the ID.4 is now the top selling vehicle. And then it's on track to have 25% of sales be EV by 2026. For a big company, that's actually a large number of EVs. So that's a good news story. In addition to that, they're spending a third of all their capital expenditures on that transition to EVs by 2025. That's totals of 52 billion euros. They're going to have 70 fully electric models by 2030, 18,000 fast charging stations that they're developing along with Ionity, because they're a major stakeholder in that. And that would satisfy 1/3 of the total demand for Europe. I would assume Tesla's the potentially other third to a half of that, and then everybody else makes up the difference, but we'll see. And not only are they doing it from an EV perspective, but on the logistics side and the production side, reducing the CO2 per vehicle and the reduction in energy consumption across their supply chain. So that's also part of their plans. Next slide. Toyota makes 9.5 million vehicles, so they're next up on my list in terms of revenue, and they're spending 17.5 billion on EVs up to 2030, so nowhere near the same kind of expenditure that Volkswagen is doing. But at the same time, they're going to basically claim to make the same number of EVs at that time. So interesting. And Lexus is becoming an EV-only brand by 2035. And some of those first vehicles that they're planning are a Lexus sports car with 700 kilometers of range and their really ugly Toyota BZ4X SUV in mid-2022. I don't have a lot of faith that they'll do what they say they'll do, because their numbers don't match up with Volkswagen's, and they still are talking a lot about hydrogen and multiple fuel offerings, whatever that is. So there, maybe. Next slide. As I was mentioning with Daimler, I learned a lot about Daimler as a company just by following or reading what their reports were. And they're kind of small in the space of vehicles in general at 2.4 million, but they sell a lot of vehicles in China as well as in Europe, more so than they sell in North America. And they also sell a lot of vans, which is a big market in Europe. Just Daimler alone sold 380,000 vans in Europe, basically in Europe. And they've electrified 14,000 of those. So that's only 5%, but that's a 120% increase from their previous year. So if you like vans, great. And then they also, because Daimler's a very prestigious automaker, all of their top-end vehicles are selling really well because their goal is to make the most desirable vehicles. And so they're electrifying all of their high-end vehicles as well. So the fully electric Maybach electric SUVs in 2023, the G-Class, which made them famous in 1956 or whenever it came out, that's being electrified in 2024. Their AMG vehicles are all being electrified, with 3 new ones coming out around that same time as well. And then they're also going to be offering an all-electric model in every segment by 2025. Everything else on here is kind of around how they're doing that, and they're all going to be based on the same kind of modular, scalable platform that every EV manufacturer is going with. And then having a specific performance-oriented architecture for their AMG platform. They're going to have a van EV platform and then a scalable one for everything else. That's this slide. And then their next slide that I've got here, because they keep sharing more information about what they do. Okay, the next one. They've actually quantified some things, which is better than a lot of companies do. And they give the capacity for 200 gigawatt hours of batteries, 8 new cell factories. They'll have a third of a stake in their automotive cells company, which is new, which will be making 120 gigawatt hours by 2030. Have solid state batteries in 2028. All this stuff coming out in-house for all their AMG model performance motors, recycling all their production materials and their lithium supply, and CO2-free steel from various manufacturers of that. All kinds of interesting information on Daimler in their annual reporting. Very cool company. Doesn't get enough press. I think they should get more of it. Next slide. So Ford, which is the first North American automaker I think I've spoken to, makes 3.9 million vehicles, and like Mike had said, has ramped up their production numbers significantly over that time. On track for 150,000 F-150 electrics in 2023 or 2024, depending on how fast they want to ramp up again in the next 6 months. 200,000 Mach-E's, the E-Transit van, which outsells its next largest competitor 2-to-1 and is, I think, nearly 35-40% of the entire van market in North America. So that would be an interesting thing to watch. They're going to get a Volkswagen electric platform to help build their first couple EVs. And then their bigger plans are the same kind of plans that Volkswagen's launched, with a 30 billion investment between now and 2025. And then 3 new battery plants that are same kind of scale of what Daimler's doing. And then having 50% of their global vehicle volume be fully electric by 2030. Next slide. Our infamous GM production numbers. I ignored last year's numbers because, for all intents and purposes, they weren't interesting. But assuming that they can get their shit together, they've got the same kind of plans that Ford has. But since they make way more vehicles than Ford, their actual total numbers aren't as big as what Ford's numbers are. So they'll only offer EVs by 2035, 50% targets in North America for 2030, and then 1 million vehicles in 2025. So not to the same scale that Ford's going to get to in 2025, but because they're larger numbers in the end, eventually they may get to produce more EVs than Ford does, only by this year's scale of what GM's able to produce. Next slide. I'm going to just briefly talk about Honda, and all Honda's doing is piggybacking on GM's technology. And their 100% zero emission vehicles by 2040 doesn't even meet Canada's 2035 mandate. So generally, they're just not moving fast enough. We'll see if they can survive. Next slide. BMW, we all know them from their i3, which I think was arguably the most sustainable vehicle of its time. might have been surpassed by some new entrants recently, but took them a while to get going. And somehow they think in 2023 they're going to get 90% of segments covered by a battery electric vehicle. So that's next year. And they currently only have the iX and the i4. Their next ones they've identified that they're going to electrify are the X1, which is a huge seller, the 7 Series, which is their flagship, and the 5 Series, which is big in Europe, and the Mini Countryman, because BMW owns Mini. So that one could sell really well as well. And their total target is 2 million total sales by 2025, 50% of global sales EV by 2030. And by 2025, they're hoping to match the range and manufacturing costs of ICE vehicles. That's kind of in line with a lot of automakers nowadays, I think. From a premium segment, I think they could get there sooner, but I'm not in business and I'm not BMW, so I don't really know. Next slide. I didn't know SAIC existed until I started doing this research, but they have a very large presence in China, which is the largest kind of growing market for automakers. They've been the largest automaker in China for the last 15 years, and they have plans for 70 different EV models by 2025. That's a lot. But they've also got partnerships. So because they have more brand recognition in China, they benefit from having, like they have sort of the technology coming from Volkswagen and GM, and they use their brand placement to get more sales in China for those companies. So it's kind of a reciprocal relationship where they sell something that somebody else has made under their name, and they work out things in that sense. They also produce a ridiculously cheap EV, which is actually it's selling in ridiculous numbers because of a cult following where people dress them up as like inside of them they've dressed them up in like velvet and anime characters, and it's weird, but it's very Asian, and they're going to sell 1.2 million of those this year, sorry. Which is pretty impressive, actually. But they also have MG under their brand. So anybody who's a 1970s fanatic who likes the MG Triumph, I think is what it's called, or the one that is unreliable and very cute as a convertible, but very unreliable. They now make really cheap SUVs. And they undercut Volkswagen by a significant margin, so they're actually able to sell a very compelling electric vehicle for an actually reasonable price that a lot of manufacturers can't beat because of their large presence in China. So
AMG is originally from the UK. All of their models are unreliable.
Yes, I think they've taken out the most unreliable portion of it, which is everything to do with the engine controls and the transmission and all of that, and simplified it with electric motors and things. So I follow somebody who owns one, and they've driven it 25,000 miles or something in the UK in the 9 months they've had it. Best decision they've ever made. It's fantastic. But this one's interesting as well because SAIC, is planning to go all electric in 2030. So if they can do that, that's 6 million more EVs if they stay producing the same number that they're producing now. So because China's a larger market and growing faster, that number may increase from 6 million to 7 or 8 or 9 or whatever crazy number they can do with that really tiny EV, which would be fun to see. Where are we at now? Next one. Stellantis, Mike's favorite company. They've got a $30 billion investment up to 2025. So the same kind of, actually that's 30 billion euros because now they're owned by a European company. But that's kind of in line with what GM and Ford are doing. More of their sales are going to Europe than to the US because Europe is a better and more advanced country than us, arguably. So they did 130 gigawatt hours by 2025, and 260 gigawatt hours by 2030. So same kind of scale of what Daimler's doing. And then those are split between 5 different factories in Europe and North America. Cobalt-3 batteries in 2024 and solid-state batteries in 2026. Kind of in line. I think it's faster actually than a lot of the bigger brands, but these are all projections of where they think they'll be rather than where they actually will turn out to be. So take that with a grain of salt. Next. Hyundai. We all like to talk a big game about Hyundai's cool EVs. They only sold 100,000 of those in 2020. And they're planning to only sell 560,000 in 2025, which is 15% of all of their sales. So hopefully they can speed that up. These are, I believe, I was focusing specifically on the fully electric ones. And Hyundai makes a lot of hybrids and plug-in hybrids, but not full EVs. So their hybrids, I think, outsell their EVs 2-to-1 at the moment in terms of the scale of them. So they would have to kind of shift towards the EV side rather than the electrified side in order to make a dent in this. And they still have a lot of wording in their annual reporting about hydrogen technology. So because they're Korean, I imagine that's one of the bigger things for them. Yeah, I think that covers all of the automakers, perhaps. Next slide. Yes, so that was it. So I'm going to summarize this briefly. So this is what currently is going on. So all those numbers of current production, like this is just looking at those automakers that I was mentioning. The EVs that they sell represent 3% of all the vehicles they sell, whereas 97% is represented by all the other cars that they sell. On the next slide, which is 2025's kind of scaling, this gets you to 30%, and this is assuming that Tesla produces 3.5 million vehicles, which I think is a reasonable number, but I could be wrong. And I'm sure a Tesla person will remind me of what they're planning to do by that date, but I chose 3.5 million as a reasonable number. And so that gets you 30% by 2025 being EVs of all the largest automakers. So that's pretty good. Not perfect, but pretty good. And then the next slide, the 2030 production numbers, based on everything that the automakers have told us, that's 41%. And this is with Tesla's 7 million production number in that year, which again is my projection. It could be wrong, it could be way off base. That's what I've said. You're welcome to make additional suggestions. So in conclusion, the only other thought that I'd like to add is that this 59% of all their cars is either going to be made up by some of these automakers becoming more ambitious, which there's a 60% market that's still unreached by all these large manufacturers. Also leaves open the door for any startups to come in and take control of that 60%. And it also kind of implies that some of these automakers, that if they don't move fast enough, that's going to be a losing opportunity for them. And maybe there's going to be more players or less players or the same players with different partners. There's a lot of interesting things that could happen in that between now and 2030, which is actually only 8 years away. So fun stuff.
So these are all Western automakers that you were covering, right?
As opposed to, yes,
as opposed to Chinese entrants, right? And Vietnamese and whatnot. So I think these numbers at the end, like when we get to 2030, it'll be interesting to look at this slide and see how it compares to what happened. But I suspect what's going to happen is a lot of the legacy guys are going to struggle, right? And I think the Chinese will come in with massive volumes to make up the difference, right? Because we have the largest automakers here in sales for now. This is under the current paradigm. But if a whole bunch of new Chinese companies swoop in and meet the demand that's built up, these numbers are going to look way different, right?
Yeah, so this is kind of my understanding of where legacy auto is today. So this is just looking at legacy auto. As I kind of finished off with, legacy auto is just not moving fast enough, and that leaves open the opportunity for anybody to come in and take over the rest of the market that's not satisfied with taking its time and waiting things out and updating plants and setting up supply chains and all that. So that's kind of where, say, Chinese companies that have volume but not revenue, they come in, take the control of some of that. The Vietnamese companies that you've mentioned before, they start making interesting cars that people want. Interesting.
Yeah, because our projections are basically by 2033, it's game over, right? Like it'll be almost 100% of new cars will be electric. So that 59% has a big chunk of that is going to disappear to somebody else.
Actually, it's likely to happen. Yeah, it's likely to happen faster in Europe because they have many countries have said that they'll ban the sale of gas cars by 2030, right? So yes, but Mike, it's hard to predict far in the future, and the furthest you go in the future, the harder it is, right? And given that we've seen Ford double their estimates for production of the F-150 a few times, and massively increase the production of the Mach-E, they're probably looking at what could they do otherwise with other models to
and like this isn't counting Rivian's 250,000 cars they plan to do by 2025 and whatever, right? So
so Craig, you had a question?
My comment was sort of the small sectors, like what do we think is going to happen with Africa? What does anybody have an idea? What percentage of sort of global car sales are happen on the African continent? Like, what's the what do we have there as far as to deal with? Because that's the one sort of continent I can see there's still being maybe a demand for gas, just as the electricity supply isn't as reliable and all of that. I don't know. I mean, I'm just sort of what do we think is going to happen with Africa in the next 5 years?
Well, so I'll take a stab at that. The African market is relatively small. It's I believe a few million vehicles a year, maybe 5 at the very, very most, and that includes North African countries, some of which are relatively wealthy, and South Africa, and a few others that also have some good wealth. Most of them are relatively poor countries. What I think is going to happen is something similar to what we're seeing in India, actually. And in India, there are lots of cars there that are sold that are not would not pass the regulations here in North America. So, but that means that Tata is able to sell a car for $4,000 in India, right? So I think that some of those cars, electrified versions of them, actually will take up most of the market in Africa. Why do I say electrified? Because in lots of places in Africa, the infrastructure isn't there for gas as well as electricity, and Africa is very well placed for solar, which is the cheapest form of energy, and certainly in Africa at this point. So poor people, if they could get a cheap electric car, small cheap electric car like the one sold by SAIC in China there, the one that they're selling huge amounts of, that would be affordable, and the operational costs would be so much lower, less maintenance, all that kind of stuff. It's just going to be easier for Africans to adopt that technology. I think it's going to be similar to the phone situation. So in Africa, everybody's got a cell phone, or well, everybody, most people have a cell phone. People have a phone anyways. They don't have a landline. They leapfrogged over the landline technology, right?
The other thought I have with it as well is sort of to on your lines of that is sort of the Arcimoto type approach that I think that the that you'll probably see Africa go with a lot of like. I mean, you already see the motorbikes in Africa, you know, with like 3 people on them and all this stuff hanging off of it and already. So I think there's a good chance that you'll see a lot of Arcimoto type of these sort of, you know, electric motorcycle type setups that will also take away from the need for a lot of actual vehicles in these
Actually,
areas.
if you look at the numbers for the amount of electric two-wheelers there are in the world, I saw a number a couple of years ago, so it'd be higher today, but a couple of years ago there were over 200 million electric motorbikes of various types. Okay, and that would be, I think a lot of them would be in China. There's certainly a lot of them in India also, and Africa, I'm not sure. But in China, actually, they're discouraging two-stroke engines because of the pollution impact, and that's created a huge market for these motorbikes. And you know, if you look at a motorbike right now, an electric one would be similar in price as a gas one anyways. So I don't, you know, I don't see that as being a barrier for Africa or for India for that matter. India still has lots of gas motorbikes. So India is a funny market because although you would think that it'd be very easy for lots of companies to go in there because the common language is English, there's a lot of other impediments, corruption in particular, that make it very, very difficult to operate any business in India. Is there any other comments, questions? You guys are way too quiet tonight.
I've shared a link to that $5,000 tiny little Chinese thing. There's a very big modification environment around it. So somebody's taken one and made it into one of those G-Wagons with 6 wheels. Another person's taken one and put like made it into one of those zombie vehicles where it has the plow on the front to run over zombies. A couple of other ones where it's like Pokemon and mountains and like anime things. It's a very interesting concept that's seemingly caught on very quickly.
Art, you had a question, comment?
Yeah, I was just wondering if anyone has had any news on vehicle to grid connections and what might be happening in Ontario.
So I know I haven't heard anything more lately on that. So what I would like to see though is I would like to see the government mandating, the federal government mandating that every new vehicle supports vehicle to grid. And right now there are very few vehicles that support that. Ironically, the Nissan Leaf is one of those. With all its other faults, it does support that. But that I think is one of the first steps before we could get any further.
Yeah, I'm, as I mentioned earlier, I'm currently working towards getting solar panels, and the company that's I'm working with on that has contacts at a company called Peak Power, and Peak Power apparently has, I don't know if you guys already know this, you probably do, has a pilot program with Hydro One to do vehicle to grid. And I'm actually hoping that I might get involved in that. And to do so, I need to buy a Nissan Leaf. And my question right now with Peak Power, and I'm talking through this other company, so this conversation is very slow. But my conversation with Peak Power is like, so you're interested in more people joining. What model year do I need of a Nissan Leaf to take part? Because I'd like to buy the oldest one possible as a kind of grocery run car, as a third car for the family. We have a Bolt and one of the old Ioniqs, and so this would be our third car with the lowest range to just go for grocery runs and stuff. and supply some backup power during power failures, or to do vehicle to grid. Although it doesn't really make sense under the current net metering to do vehicle to grid. It's vehicle backup power is all you can do, because the current net metering system takes away time of use. So you can't like absorb power at night from the grid and then sell it back during the day at a profit, because you pay and buy at the same price.
Yeah, that's because of the
all day
structure.
long.
Yeah, that's because of the structure of that program, right? But to make vehicle to grid work, they're going to have to figure out some way to change that, right? And I think with the pilot projects they're running are intended to help them understand, what the vehicle to grid situation would look like, and so that they could figure out how to price things, how to compensate owners for participation in things like that. Right. So it's still in the early stages here in Canada. Sorry, Mitchell?
Yeah, there's 3 different things. I mean, there's vehicle to home, which is you're just using your own EV to power your own home. That's kind of a small market. Then there's vehicle to grid, which is you're kind of supporting the grid in whatever capacity you can. That kind of works off of a blockchain technology to make sure everything kind of flows and it's secure and not screwing up somebody's electrical supply. And everything else is kind of around, like, you can, like, some people just connect EV drivers that have charge to other vehicles that need charging, and you can work out transactions that way. None of these are kind of really set up in a market. They're kind of all based off of small little players trying to figure out the best system to make their one solution work. As far as I know, there's nobody that's really looked at it from a grid perspective, which is where the bigger opportunities would be. It's all kind of located on either one property or two, or maybe a set of commercial properties rather than the grid as a whole.
Yeah. So this becomes a more Marcel, is that the car you're showing, that $4,000 car? I guess that's what he's showing. So we had a discussion on this a little while back, and if you look at what's happening in terms of projects elsewhere and all that, and in terms of providing.
I think we lost Raymond. He's been having issues with his new computer.
Did he not pay the Zoom bill?
Oh, Windows.
Our internet is also terrible.
Oh, yeah. Well, Microsoft, it's what happens when you use Microsoft.
I play Skynet myself.
Skynet?
I'm back.
Not Skynet. Oh, there he is.
Yeah, sorry. There's something that happens that it stops Teams.
Yeah, it's called
for
Windows.
some reason.
It's called Microsoft products.
And I hope the recording has restarted. I think if it, I hope it didn't stop. Anyways, yeah. So what I was saying is there's projects out there that where they're doing. They're trying to aggregate a whole bunch of vehicles into a sort of like a virtual battery type of thing. And if you look, you just do some simple back of the envelope calculations, looking at large amounts of vehicles and how much capacity you could store in those vehicles. It's actually pretty surprising how much energy we'd be able to put in those batteries, and it may negate the need for us to have dedicated storage for dealing with green energy that's intermittent. Right, so the production of green energy is intermittent, but if we use car batteries to store the excess when there's excess and drain those batteries when there's when we need to consume more, it would allow us to with a very, very small incremental cost have huge amounts of storage. So lots of interesting things happening in that space.
What is the current capacity as far as how much energy can actually be pulled out of these vehicles? Like, what's the like my understanding was that even like the Leaf is the equivalent of about a 10 amp breaker. That what it can be pulled out like.
That's
Am I
No,
work
the
off
vehicle to
of
grid for the Leaf uses a CHAdeMO adapter, so it's a lot more than that.
Yeah, but there still is a limit to how much you could pull out, right? And that depends on the vehicle. And the F-150 Lightning will have a vehicle to grid capability, as does the Ioniq 5 that Mike will be getting in shortly, we hope.
Any day now. Any day.
Yeah, and so, but if you look at the calculations that have been done, you don't need to be pulling that much juice out of each car to make a big difference. Because if you're looking at easily 1 million cars, by 2030, that's a heck of a lot of cars that you could pull from, right?
No, but
And
he's
if you
talking about the
look at
power per car, right? So like 10 amps is it's less than a standard outlet, right? Like it's 15 amp, like the Ioniq 5 does
yes,
15 amps. Just
yes,
because. But the Leaf will do maybe somebody else knows the answer, but I know they use the CHAdeMO, which means that they probably do more than 15 amps. I would imagine they do something like 30 probably.
yeah, I think it's somewhere
I've
around
read some
2,500.
I've read some material that says they're looking at about 5 kilowatts.
5 kilowatt from the Leaf?
Of power? Yeah.
No, that'll be 5 kilowatts per EV, whichever EV it is. It's up to the EV designers to put a limit on what they'll permit with their batteries.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but 5 kilowatts sounds about right. That would be a level 3 type power draw.
No, level 2.
50
level 2.
would be level 3.
Sorry, 50. Yeah, okay. Yeah, you're right. Sorry.
5 is like a level 2 and a poor level 2 at that.
Yeah, it's like a lame level 2. You're right.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, a 30
it's-
amp level 2 is 7.2 kilowatt, right? So.
Yeah. And it's just a matter of getting the right connection to the battery, right? Like if, my Bolt does 150 kilowatts of output when I'm accelerating the other ramp to the Queensway or whatever. So in theory, you can pull tremendous amounts of power out of those batteries if you just have the right connection.
Yes. However, if you want to not strain the battery and all that, you want to pull less, right? So
you don't want to pull 150 continuous, no, but
exactly.
You could spike it to that obviously without a problem,
Yeah. And for if you're trying to provide frequency regulation services and all that, you need to have at least 1 megawatt of capacity in most markets today. And so what some companies are doing is they want to be the aggregators that are going to take a whole bunch of cars, and together all those cars will be able to provide 1 megawatt or more, and they'll be able to use those vehicles to help do frequency stabilization and services of that type, right? So lots of interesting developments in that space. We could spend a whole meeting talking about that actually. So, any other comments, questions, Marcel?
Yeah, I've got a Volt, and I can pull like 1,500 watts out of the 12-volt battery if I keep the inverter running. I was reading the instructions, the owner's manual for the Tesla, and they said that if you do any kind of connection to like a standalone to a stationary system, you'll void the warranty on your Tesla. But I've heard Elon talk about vehicle to grid. Are there any plans to retrofit Teslas for some kind of output?
So if you listen to what Sandy Munro had to say about that when he took apart the I believe it was a Model 3 that he took apart, there is a small hardware upgrade required to support vehicle to grid. So there's a hardware upgrade required, but my point is I would like the government to mandate that every manufacturer support vehicle to grid so that eventually we have enough vehicles so we could do these aggregation services and start peak shaving mostly. The reason I'm interested in peak shaving is because that's a time when you use the gas plants in Ontario, and in most jurisdictions, the more polluting plants are used during peak times, and this would allow us to reduce greenhouse gases quite a bit, right? So, but right now there's an issue with most cars not supporting that, right?
The issue,
Okay, yeah,
I
thanks.
think,
I forgot about the about Sandy Monroe's
Yeah.
tear down. So the
Yeah,
Model 3, I presume, would be the same as the Model Y. So it
Yep.
looks like there's the possibility for a retrofit. For
Yeah, it's a pretty what Sandy was saying is it's a pretty cheap change to do, but it's like everything else, shortage of chips or whatever else, they didn't put it in, right? So,
Okay.
but
Well,
yeah, so, but you're right,
there's
Elon has talked about that quite a bit. So I'm, I would think that at some point he's going to want to have all his vehicles support that.
I don't know. I think more recently he's been talking about it as unnecessary. Like he's looking at just building out his stationary, like Powerwall type production, right? He made Powerwall. He linked Powerwall and solar, so you kind of need to get both if you're getting either. More recently, and I think the reason he gave was that really cars should be out driving as much as possible. So he's very hooked on this full self-driving. And once you get full self-driving, then the cars, you'll need a lot fewer cars in the world because all the cars will be out driving almost all the time, or at least 5 times as much as they are currently. And so they won't be available. They'll need to charge when they're stationary because they won't have.
And if you watch Adam something on YouTube, he dispels that whole concept of having autonomous cars wandering around all the time. Because it turns out most people don't need cars all the time. Most people need cars at the same time because they're all trying to get home from work. And so having all the cars wandering around the city is not really realistic.
And it doesn't do anything for traffic either and all that. So there's a bunch of reasons. I think a lot of people, like they don't want to share their houses. They don't want to share their car.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be cool if it was to work, but it just doesn't. Like, the more you think about it, the dumber it sounds. And like Elon's, he gets a lot of hits, but he also gets a lot of misses, and I think that might be one of the misses.
Yeah,
it's the same reason flying cars will never work. Because imagine having that traffic jam, but in the air.
Oh my god!
Yeah. Well, he wants to put them all underground, but I think my point wasn't so much whether it'll work or not. I think he's not going to.
Yeah,
he's going to resist enabling vehicle to grid because he's on this full self-driving bent, right?
And he has this other market. He has another market he wants to dominate, which is the home battery thing, right? So he's got another product that would compete with exactly.
Well, not just home battery, but also industrial scale storage, right? So with the mega pack and all that. So
yeah, he has incentives to not pursue it. Should we continue on with presentations?
Sure.
Because we're not at the round table yet.
Yeah,
keep the meeting going.
Yeah, so actually we don't have that much more actually formal material, but I will go through it. So just a relatively quick update on the CoreCS project. So
need to present, or do you have slides?
Sorry? Oh,
there's no slides showing.
Yeah, because when
your computer died because Windows,
it
reset everything.
Okay, you should see it now.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, great. So so when we talked about this earlier, we mentioned to you guys that we didn't have any name for the program and all that yet. So we do have a name. We had some interesting discussions about the name. Our preferred name was not chosen. And actually, I think it's Phil that suggested it, and it was EV Experience is what we wanted to be able to use. But EnviroCenter did some research, and there are many other projects that are using EV Experience, and getting a URL that was available for that would have been a bit of an issue. So criteria were relatively straightforward. We wanted something relatively short, easy to remember, catchy, right? Something that you don't have to spend minutes trying to remember. And low confusion. What we meant by that is you want something that is it wouldn't confuse the general public. So a lot of the suggestions we had ZEV in there or something like that. So zero emission vehicle, right? Well, for us, ZEV, we know what it means, but the general public would not necessarily know what it means, right? So we tried to find something that was had as little confusion as possible, and something that would be easy to translate. So drum roll, and the name will be Go EV. Pretty straightforward, right? And we're still working on the logo. So EnviroCenter are the ones who are doing that part for us. So they have a designer that's looking at that. They showed us some ideas at the last meeting we had on Friday with them. And so we're expecting to have a logo fairly soon. And you'll see on the next slide why we want the logo fairly soon. So a bit more stuff, a bit more details about where we're going with that. If I could get my slides to my build to work. Okay, so we're going to start the training quite soon. Okay, so we're still working on the training program, and we need to actually we need to get our butts in gear to get this in place. But anyways, we're gonna have a training program for everybody who's going to be doing events, whether they do test drives or not. We're gonna have a training program that's going to go over some of the common stuff just to make sure everybody's on the same baseline in terms of understanding, what the answers that we have for the common questions are. Everything from range anxiety questions to mining in the Congo and all these kinds of things that tend to come up all the time during events, right? So we're going to set up some training for that, and you'll those who have volunteered to help us out, you'll get more information on that as soon as we're ready to start rolling that out. EnviroCenter is going to be helping with that too, because we want to make sure also that we have we take into consideration the needs of the individual that we're talking to, right? So we want to make sure that people understand that how to approach someone in a way that won't put them off, right? So it's basic selling stuff in many respects, right? So making sure you're not making things too complicated for people and all that, right? So our first event, which will be EVCO only, will be on the 23rd of April, unless we end up booking something earlier. I don't think so. But for those of you who've been with EVCO for a while, you probably know that we've been doing an event in Kemptville for many years now with Jeff Goodman, who's based in Kemptville, and it's an eco show that he is a part organizer of, and there's a large component of electric vehicles. So he's getting some dealers to bring some vehicles also, and we will be bringing our kit to augment that and to do some test drives. Okay. And actually it'll be EVCO only because EnviroCenter, they're focused mostly on Ottawa, and they don't want to step on the toes of other organizations and other adjoining municipalities where they have similar organizations that do the work, right? So they'll focus more on stuff that's in the Ottawa area specifically. So EnviroCenter also, they have 5 community outreach staff that are used to do a number of different programs, and they want to train all of those 5 people to do test drives and to participate in our events during the following year. Okay, so it should be a pretty interesting year ahead. Oops, someone's been hacked on Facebook, and I'm getting a whole bunch of stuff Anyways, official start, it will be in May. So so EnviroCenter, they want to launch in May. So we're going to do the April 23rd event anyways. And that will be sort of like a practice run for us. And we should have all the logo stuff ready for then anyways. But we'll officially launch in May when we're sure that the weather won't be bad and when everything else is prepared. So our friends at Communauto, they have a challenge of sourcing the vehicles that they're going to be using for the test drives because, as as everybody else has seen, they're kind of hard to get our hands on. But they're getting some Kia, some what are they again?
Neros, Kia
Neros,
Neros.
yeah. So they're getting, I believe it's 6 now in Neros. For this program and one other program they're running also. But of course they're in short supply, so they're trying to get those in as soon as possible, and they're hoping that we'll have at least some of them in May, so that we could use them for our events. Now, the reason why we're looking for the logo very soon is because of this. We actually just purchased a trailer we had been talking about purchasing. So that's what it looks like. So we're waiting for the logo and a wrap design so we could wrap it. Like I mentioned before, the reason we bought a trailer of that size, so essentially what we did is we bought the biggest trailer that would be under 3,000 pounds essentially, or rated for 3,000 pounds. And the reason we wanted, or I wanted it big anyways, was to have the largest possible surface to put logos and put stuff that will attract the eye of people that are will be attending events, right? So so we're going to use that to transport our equipment, but also as a floating billboard. Okay, so that so we purchased that a couple weeks ago, and it's in Sam's driveway right now, waiting to be wrapped. So as soon as we get the logo, we're going to get that wrapped.
Speaking
and yeah,
did
Sam,
we
yeah.
find a
Whose
parking
model
spot
what?
for it?
Sorry.
Did we find a parking spot for the trailer?
So that's something we'll discuss offline.
We're still
I think
working on
Mike,
that. Yeah.
yeah, Mike was working on that, and well, no, we're not going to park it in your driveway all the time, Sam, unless you want us to, but you probably don't, right? So we will get it.
It's a challenge for snow removal.
Yeah. So no, we don't want it to be in anybody's driveway. It's not. I'm one of the ones who was saying I didn't want it in my garage, right? So definitely we're going to find some other place where we could store it permanently. And so
Maybe we want to park it on a street corner so everybody can see the logo continuously.
Yeah.
We could install a horn on it and park it right on Wellington.
Oh my god.
No, that's illegal now.
I mean, that's what you can do now, though, and then we can have a hot tub and a bouncy castle. We'll just keep it inside the trailer. It'll be great.
Keep it inside the trailer.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
No, the truckers ruined that for us.
Yeah, we used to be allowed.
Can we make the trailer into a sauna? That is the question.
Oh, that's easy.
Park it in the sun.
So Marcel, I think you were the one asking the question. That is my Model Y, pulling it.
Yeah.
So that's the other. Sorry.
Is there PPF on there?
I've got a bit
There's
of PPF.
a light dusting of road smut, which makes it look kind of matte, but it's not wrapped.
Oh, okay.
Well, there's like some areas of it are wrapped, so the front bumper and behind the wheels and all that stuff, but otherwise no.
Oh, okay. So it's like a partial wrap.
Yep.
Okay.
But it's transparent. It's not. There's no color in it.
I was wondering if it was a matte wrap or.
Yeah, it does look kind of matte, eh?
Yeah, that's just the conditions that
the lighting. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So no, it's actually usually it's very shiny. So I like my cars shiny. I don't like them matte. So anyway, so that's where we are with the program, and we'll be we'll be getting you more stuff as we as things develop. Those of you who volunteered last time to help out, we will be reaching out to you to connect as soon as we have the training bit set up, and we'll go from there. So it should be an exciting time. So any questions on that?
So I just want to make clear, the training bit is for the concierge bits where we give test drives to individuals. There's no special training to show up to an event and just talk about your car like we always do. That's always going to be the normal thing. That's an EVCO thing. But if you're going to give test drives, then there's a bit more stuff involved.
There's more stuff involved for the test drives, but there will still be training for people attending the events, just helping us with the booth and all that.
Yeah, I mean a little bit, but it's not the same type of thing, right?
No, it's not the same.
We always welcome volunteers.
And one of the things you need to keep in mind too is that given that we have Communauto as part of the group that's doing this, we're going to also want to make sure people are aware of what Communauto could do for them. And if you think about it, it's much better for us to have someone use an electric Communauto car than have their own car, right? For environmentally speaking, it's certainly much better, and it's certainly cheaper for them if they're on a limited budget. Okay. Any other questions, comments? No. Okay, so
Lynn was asking, is there a plan to insure the trailer? And I said, yes, there is.
Yes. Yeah, and actually that's something that the training will cover. Insurance stuff. Yes, absolutely. We're going to have insurance for EVCO also. We already do have some coverage through EV Society, but we'll have our own coverage so that to make sure that there aren't any unfortunate, nasty surprises from that perspective. Okay. Any other questions? No.
Actually,
okay.
Alan made a really good point, or a good suggestion. Solar panels and a battery pack for the trailer, so we could power whatever things we have.
Yeah. So we've had that suggestion already, and I think it's an absolutely fantastic idea. If someone wants to look into that for us, that would be great. With a specific setup that we could actually make work, because we do want to use some electric things, including funny enough, Mike's electric barbecue. Yeah, and so Mike with his car will have a capability of providing some power, so we won't be completely stuck, but it would be cool to have some panels so that if someone else is trailering that thing around, that we could use power from there. Okay. I'd love to have also a TV that would have a scrolling thing that would show all the EVs available or something of the sort, similar to what we had at the meat trailer last year, whenever it was that we did that with plug and drive at IKEA. So we'll need some power for a few other things too. So, okay.
When I was at the St. Hyacinth event, there was a company there in the display area, or at the display facility, that had these solar panels that they could configure for different shapes of vehicles. And I was discussing with them about creating a shaped panel for my my own trailer for where I haul canoes and kayaks in the summertime. I want something a little more aerodynamic coming off the back of the bolt, pulling this trailer. And so I was talking to them about that. And then I've got the battery pack of my truck is probably going to come out of the truck this year, is my guess, and probably put into my own trailer. But might be able to split that up. I've got 24 kilowatt hours of battery pack, probably more than I need for my own trailer purposes. So that would potentially could make some arrangement around half a pack perhaps for that. But there should be other solutions around that. I mean, with your trailer, you could deal with straight flat panels. You wouldn't need any special shaped.
You just put them on the roof.
Just lock them down on the roof. I mean, you could tip them up for show and to get a better sun angle when we're on display, but it should be flat and right on the roof.
And then some sort of solar charge controller.
B, to make it less visible when it's just parked, because you don't want someone panels off the top of it. So
yeah. So Sam, who's on the board now and is an electrician, says he could work on a system. So let's Alan, when you're ready to get rid of those batteries, can you let us know, and we'll figure out some way to set up the even if you have to spend some money on it, it's not a big deal. We'll figure out some way of having some system. It would be great to do that for all sorts of reasons, right? So,
yeah, it would be.
Yeah. Cool. I like the thinking. Okay, so sorry.
Can I put a little cold water on it, in the sense of, I guess my question becomes sort of one of limited resources and all of that. I guess I would like to see, like, at the end of the day, we're hoping to do what, 100 events in the next, little bit. Like, how much will we actually have and use and need and all of that? I guess my question is, that kind of cash, I would like to sort of see that put into sort of the more outreach to get more people to come do drives and stuff like that. I don't know. I'm just sort of a balancing of limited resources. Is that really where we want to be putting our limited resources?
Well, we don't want to put thousands of dollars towards that, but I think it might be worth putting a bit of money towards it, right? Because we'll need some electricity anyways for what we need. So somehow we need to power some way, and I'm not going to use a gas generator. That's for darn sure. Right?
Yeah, we don't want a repeat of the Guido event after the tornadoes, where there were like gas generators running in the background, because that sort of undermines the whole point, right? And the idea is, like, this way we would be able to power like a sound system if we needed to do a presentation. You could do all sorts of stuff with power. So power is super useful to have.
Yeah,
I agree. Power is super useful to have, and you're right. And I guess yes, because we're under that requirement of not being able to use a gas generator, this may be the best way to do it. Anyway, okay.
And also, we could probably get a lot of parts easily. There might even be someone who has like old panels that they're replacing or something are still useful. Like, there's ways to do this on the cheap.
Yeah.
Well, even conventional solar panels aren't expensive anymore, right? Just a couple of panels is all you need, and they're pretty cheap.
Yeah, they're no longer expensive. They were super expensive before, but now they're pretty cheap. Okay, cool. So let's that's certainly not the priority, right? But let's work on that, and it'd be really cool to do that. Okay, so past events, really there was just one to mention over the last month, and that was the virtual green drink on B Corps. So these are also known as social enterprises. So if you're interested in that, you could watch the recording of the green drinks. It's quite interesting what they're trying to do. What B Corps are essentially are organizations that are privately owned and for-profit organizations, but they don't have exclusively a profit-making mandate. So the idea is to integrate social objectives into the mandate of these organizations, as well as financial objectives, right? So it's quite interesting. Upcoming events. So again, with our friends at Green Drinks, we have an event coming up, and this is on. It's an organization called Connecting Environmental Professionals, and I've been to one of their meetings before, a few of their meetings before, and it's quite interesting what they're doing. They're trying to build up a community of people that are working on green stuff, similar in some ways to Green Drinks, but I think in a more formal way, if I could put it that way. But anyways, so they'll be presenting free presentation as usual, right? The second Thursday of the month, so March 10th at 6:15 p.m. is when the fun starts. And so the registration link is there in the slide, okay? So upcoming events, what we have on our calendar up to now. So we're still filling out the calendar. We expect to have many events on the calendar, but at this point, what we've got firmed up, Okay, the first two actually are events that I'm participating in. So, and I wanted to highlight the first one, so that if you have any opportunities to discuss things with condos. So I've managed to get copies of some of the proposals that Invari has put together for two condos, and the costs are very, very high. So I'm looking at I'm actually talking to a condo board on the 23rd that got one of these reports about how they could do things in a much less costly way, certainly in the short term, to start allowing their owners to be able to charge their electric vehicles. Mitchell, you had a question or comment?
Yes. City is interested in things of that nature, and I'm wondering whether you'd be interested in having me attend as well to learn more about what their like. I'm just interested what their concerns are, what they've heard, what their kind of plans might look like, what their ambitions are, that kind of thing.
Okay.
So I don't know if there's a friendly amendment to open that up to maybe just myself. I don't know.
I could certainly ask. I don't think it'll be a problem. I could certainly ask. Okay. Remind me if I don't reach out to you on that. Okay.
I'll follow up with you next week if I haven't heard anything.
Okay. The guy that reached out to me on this is someone I used to work with at Microsoft several years ago, that knew that I was interested in and knowledgeable about EVs. So, and as we've discussed before, we are trying to get some condos to implement lower cost solutions for the moment anyways, to deal with the first few adopters, early adopters of EVs. And knowing full well that once every spot needs to be electrified for an EV, there might be a need for significant investment, but by that time there'll be enough demand that it'll be worthwhile doing, right? So.
And do you know if that request came from an owner from the condo, or is it the condo board who's approaching Envari on their own behalf?
I think it's Envari that approached the board.
Oh,
and actually it's the second time they get a proposal from Envari, and the prices have gone down, but not not to the point where they become palatable for the board.
I would have figured that there are rules against Envari asking condo boards about doing this kind of thing, but I guess I'm not in law, so like much in the same way, like you can't have people who sell you like furnaces or hot water tanks approach you without your consent. I imagine there's similar rules for having Envari approach condo boards. Like it usually is the condo board approaching Envari.
Well, the condo board had to agree for sure because they had to provide some information to Envari, and they did a site visit to look at the electrical setup and whether there'd be enough space for adding what would be necessary for what they're proposing to put in place, right? So, so it was a collaboration, but I assume what happened is Envari reached out to them and said, "Hey, we could do this for you guys," and actually there's a cost for it, right? So, are you interested? And the board said yes, and they got the report, right? So,
yeah. I mean, I'd just be interested, I guess, in terms of what that looked like and maybe hearing from them about what their ambitions or plans are. So just if you're able to keep me in the loop on that, would be great.
So I'll try to get you on. I don't think that should be a problem, but I will certainly get you on there. Okay, or try to. Okay, the other thing, so April 19th to 21st, that's one of those nights we'll be doing a presentation. EVCO will be doing a presentation, one in English and one in French probably. So I'm not sure exactly what the timing will be, and it'll probably be me doing the presentations, but I may want to have someone else help out too. We'll see. So final details haven't been provided to me yet on that. So April 23rd is the Kempville Eco Fair, like I said earlier. And that we want to bring the trailer and some cars to do test drives at that event. Then following that, May 19th, the MIFO, Mouvement d'Implication Francophone d'Orléans, which is in Orleans, is doing a sort of like an environmental day. And we're going to be there to do test drives. This will be daytime during the week. So test drives and some presentations on actually both climate change and EVs. So that should be an interesting event for us. And we should have EnviroCenter there with us on that day. Okay, so that's what we're looking at this point. Sure, there'll be absolutely sure there'll be many more, but these are the ones that are confirmed in relatively short term. There is another one that's confirmed, which is the old Guido event with SmartNet Alliance, which will occur late in September, but that's a bit far out to put on the schedule at this point. Mitchell, you have another comment or question?
For that event in Orleans, do you have any details about that event yet?
In terms of?
Like the location, who's speaking, what the kind of location is, that kind of stuff?
Is that because you think the city might be interested in participating in some way?
Either participating or sharing information about the existence of this event.
Okay, so let's talk offline about that. The location is actually at the MIFO, which is on Carrière Street in Orleans. So that's their existing location, right beside Garneau High School. So that's and it's something they've done in the past, and they've invited us to participate. It's a couple of years ago, and I think the event was canceled because of COVID. So, but certainly I could ask them if they're, or have you connect with them to see if there's something they'd like the city to do, right?
Yeah, I guess I don't know what I would be contributing to yet, but I also don't know anything about the event. So
yeah,
I wouldn't want to say I could do anything without knowing what the event's for or what it's looking to achieve.
Yeah, so I'll reach out to him and get you connected, and we'll see what we could do there. It might not be necessarily you; it might be someone else in your team that might be interested in attending, right? In some way, shape, or form. So
yeah,
but
just
it's
in terms of like if you're going to do stuff on EVs and test drives and presentations, maybe having me there isn't beneficial, but from a city's perspective, we could talk about building retrofits and energy audits and all that kind of fun stuff.
Yeah, and I think they'd be very open to that. But again, let me reach out to them and see what we could do. Okay.
Yep.
Cool. So one other thing I wanted to mention before we go to the roundtable is that Mike, I think we talked about it briefly last month. He set up a EVCO channel on YouTube. We don't have very much up there yet, but we will. The intent is for us to put the recorded meetings onto there and some other material that we're going to use as part of the Go EV campaign. And actually Mike has got some plans for April Fools, so that should be pretty
kinds of fun stuff. It's going to be great. Like, comment, and subscribe.
So right now there's only 5 subscribers, so please we'd like this to get some visibility. So the more subscribers we have, the better it is. And as we get content, if you could draw attention to it, that would be fantastic.
Well, we really only have 4 subscribers because I'm one of them. So, you know.
Yeah. Well,
does
you
it
still
count?
count. You still count.
Sure. But yeah, so we're going to do a bunch of stuff. So we're going to use the channel to post our meetings, of course. So if you really love attending the meetings, but you can't, for whatever reason, attend live, then you'll be able to catch it up on the YouTube channel. We'll also do videos, how-to videos, basically. So my idea is to try and appeal to just anybody who's new to EVs. Our EVCO buyer's guide is getting a lot of traction with like non-EV types. And so this is another way to sort of help people like that. It'll be things about like how to fast charge, why EVs are better in the winter, how to, set things up, that kind of stuff. So, whatever we think of. And then, we'll do some fun pranks. And then we're going to do, Nick and I are planning a couple of road trip challenges with his Tesla and my Ioniq 5 if it ever arrives.
Whoa. Did you say his Tesla?
Well, his dad's Tesla.
Yeah, it's
his
not
dad's
mine.
Model Y. So that'll be fun. And should be good.
Yep. Okay. So that is it for that. So now it's roundtable time. So should I turn off the recording? Probably, or should I keep it on for a bit? No.
I would turn it off.
Okay, I'll turn it off.
I said I agree. I second the motion. Turn it off.
Turn it off. No need to see this.
Especially if it's going to end up on YouTube.